Hello, I'm James Warren, and welcome to the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the broke city of Denver. Well, dear listener, you may hear today that the podcast is a little more lonely as my co-host Andy Cushion is not able to join us. Don't worry, he'll be back again soon, unless the listeners rise up and say they just want me to be doing the show alone. But sound off in the comments regardless. I think we're going to have a really fantastic episode for you today as I'm joined by Montana Gao and Ed Callahan of StrongDenver. Before we get into it, would each of you just introduce yourselves to the listener and let us know your background and kind of what connects you to Denver?
Yeah, awesome. So, hello everybody. My name is Montana Gao. I'm originally from northern Minnesota, where Strong Towns is actually, kind of founded originally. I'm a software engineer by trade. I've been in Denver here for almost 3 years, and in my free time, I like to do all the things that every other person in Denver does, which is spend my time outside and in the mountains and hiking and camping and all that kind of jazz. It's really, really fun.
Hey, I'm Ed Callahan. I came here a long time ago, 2008. I came from the San Francisco Bay Area. When I was growing up as a kid there, we were fortunate. It's one of only 6 true cities left in the United States of America. It's the only one west of the Mississippi. We would go there all the time when I was a kid, but I grew up in a classic, what's now Silicon Valley, a classic ultra-car-oriented suburb. And even as a small kid, I just knew there was just something deeply alienating and depressing and oppressive about the suburbs. And every couple of weeks, every month, we go to San Francisco and say, why can't every place be like this? And then when I was a little bit older, my gateway drug for urbanism was, of course, the great Jane Jacobs. And it was just off to the races since then. I've been involved one way or another in urbanist issues ever since. And we're just delighted that we've brought the Strong Towns national message here to Denver, and we're just really pleased that it's starting to really take off.
Well, you couldn't have come on the podcast at a more opportune time. Dedicated listeners will know that we actually started asking about Strong Towns connections before the news broke for the city. But if you haven't checked out the Denver Post or Denverite lately, the city is in financially very hard times. This year, there's about a $50 million general fund deficit, and next year it's expected to be about $200 million. This is really sad, obviously, because we are losing city services and all the things that help make a city a great place to live. But also, there's the real reality for folks who work for the city. Some of them are facing layoffs. That is terrible. That's a horrible situation for any employer to be in. That's a terrible situation for us as taxpayers to feel that our government is having to lay people off. And it's, I think, a very natural thing at a time like this to wonder, how do we get here? And how do we make sure this never happens again? So if you wouldn't mind just sort of taking us through StrongDenver. What is StrongDenver even about? How does it relate to what I was just talking about? And how does StrongDenver answer the questions of how do we get here and how do we make sure this doesn't happen again?
I can take the first part of that on what is StrongDenver, right? So StrongDenver is the local chapter, official local chapter of Strong Towns, the national organization, which many more people are familiar with. And more specifically, we're just kind of a group of advocates trying to affect change here in Denver. We have various levels of advocacy where some people are, really championing different issues that we're trying to support, going to city council meetings, organizing town halls. We'll do lots of other things too, like neighborhood walks, or it's just people who want to kind of come in and hang out a little bit too. Being in a room of like-minded people and kind of, express interest in these areas. But really, at the end of the day, we're trying to be a group to empower people to affect change, to build a better and stronger Denver, a more livable and enjoyable Denver.
What do you mean there when you talk about like a stronger Denver? What does that at its core mean?
Yeah, so it means a few things, right? Like what is a strong town? Number one, that you've mentioned, the financial perspective, right? So that's a really, really big part of it, is being able to have a city that is sustainable. And a lot of people think of environmentally sustainable, and that's very, very important. Don't get me wrong, but also financially sustainable, something that's overlooked a lot more. Like cities might be making investments that are really, really poor and don't have very good long-term payoffs, right? That's a really, really big proponent to having a strong city. There are many other proponents as well, but that's probably the first one to touch on here anyway.
So if we want to do a deep dive into what's wrong with Denver's finances, unfortunately, that's an easy question to answer. And the reason why is because what's wrong with Denver is what's wrong with virtually every municipality in North America. And this is a result of 80 years of top-down government policy in favor of extreme car dependency and setting all other criteria aside. What that means, if you think about a city's plots of land. And plots of land have structures on them, and those structures generate tax revenue. And just as a matter of simple arithmetic, the more structures you have generating on a given square footage of land, the more tax revenue you can generate. And Strong Towns has long partnered with a consultancy. They're actually pretty famous in urbanism, Urban 3. Okay, and they do a lot of quantitative analysis working with individual cities to demonstrate, here's your productive neighborhoods, here's your productive streets where you're actually generating quote-unquote profit from your tax base, and you're able to use that profit to maintain the neighborhood itself, the streets, the roads, the electrical infrastructure, and so forth, in addition to providing services, fire, schools, and so forth. And that profit has been used historically now since 80 years to subsidize the less quote-unquote profitable development happening in less dense neighborhoods, which ironically and tragically, are also the more affluent neighborhoods. So the pattern that we see in almost every city in North America is more traditional, older, and less affluent neighborhoods generating tax revenues that support more affluent, more spread out, less dense neighborhoods. And the solutions to that, of course, are solutions that all urbanist groups are working on. Denver folks are working on, the Denver Streets Partnerships are working on. It's a combination of increasing density, getting rid of minimum lot sizes, getting rid of parking minimums, and redirecting resources away from extreme car dependency into more diverse, traditional, and dense forms of development.
Okay, yeah. So you just threw a lot out there, and I want to drill into kind of the core thesis here, which is that areas that have more units and there's more activity that can happen are more productive and so have a higher tax base, which allows the city to do more services. I think that some people might hear that and say, well, wait a minute, a lower density area requires fewer services. And so even though it's supporting the tax base less, it isn't putting as such a burden on the city government services. For instance, an empty field has no city services that it really requires, but it also doesn't generate any tax revenue. So how does that pencil out? What does that actually look like? And why does a more dense area outweigh its increased burden on city services, if that makes sense?
Well, you would think that, but an empty field is not a developed neighborhood. If you consider a post-war suburban neighborhood with 1/8 acre lots or 1/4 acre lots, you're going to have a small number of structures over a large amount of land. You need to have more roads. You need to have more sewers. You need to have more infrastructure per structure. Arithmetically, it just works out as being less able to generate the kind of resources necessary to maintain that additional infrastructure. On top of it, your services need to be greater. Fire departments, for example. My brother was in a fire department for many years in California. Service areas in fire departments are measured by geography. How many minutes does it take the truck to get to the call? And that's all a matter of densification or sprawl. The more sprawl you have, the more fire stations you need to have. The more fire stations you have, the bigger your budget is. And ironically, with sprawl, you have less tax revenue per square foot to maintain the budgets to provide those services.
Yeah. In the case of the fire department, fire is building agnostic. It can light up a single unit home as much as it's going to light up a sixplex that occupies the same kind of lot space there. To your point there about water main. It's like the city builds the water main on the street, and then an apartment builds all of its internal plumbing on its own dime and maybe supports 8, 10, 12 units in a place where a single unit detached would have just supported one family. So the city made a single investment of the water main, and it either generates tax revenue from one unit or from, in that case, 12. Is that kind of the idea?
That's perfect.
Okay, awesome. So when it comes to looking at the city, we talked a little bit about density. Okay, sure. But what are some core tenets of a strong town? What are the things that make a strong town strong?
Yeah, it's not just that financial perspective, right, and being financially sustainable. It's also being a place that builds community, a place that is safe and enjoyable to live in, right? A place where you might be walking down the streets, you might be somebody you might just run into somebody that happens to be in Denver often enough. Actually, it's really, really fun, and that's a sign of a strong city, right? You can build that community and you create these places that people really like to go, right? It also giving people like third places to go, right? Like places that are not your work and not your home, right? Places to hang out. That doesn't always have to be things like restaurants and bars and such like that, but like parks and libraries and just like really cool places to be, right? Like I wish that we had a lot more of that here in Denver. Ed, you mentioned San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for 2 years, and like that was a cool place to just be. I walk around and I'd be like, oh my gosh, look at the Palace of Fine Arts, or look at all these like cool landmarks and stuff like that, and all these cool parks, right? So that's another big perspective of it as well, is creating these places that people enjoy and that want to be in, that build that community.
Yeah, that like a thriving city is,
Exactly.
obviously giving you that tax base, but it is also the thing that we're all here trying to do in the first place, which is like be around other people for good reason, right? If I didn't want to be around other people, I'd be a misanthrope living in the mountains somewhere. I'm not doing that. I'm living in a city for a good reason. And it's not just the job.
It comes with amenities.
Yeah, and it comes with neighbors, and it comes with all of those things.
The tragedy is, and this is true where you live, in Uptown, the tragedy is we used to have that here. If you go to Colfax and you look around, you see a handful of legacy 19th century buildings. At least half the land, maybe more depending on the block, is parking lots. You've got fast food restaurants surrounded by an ocean of drive-through lanes and parking. And you can only imagine what these people were thinking back in the 1950s, 1960s when they said, let's knock down this beautiful city filled with serendipitous neighborhoods and wonderful shops and wonderful restaurants. Let's just destroy that. Let's wantonly and willfully destroy that and replace it with acres of parking.
It really makes you wonder why, Like,
yeah, what were they seeing? And I think there's some sad historical reasons for that, like racism, I know, played a huge role in kind of the white flight out of the city. And when we think about, we've got these parking lots, we've got these commercial strips that have been degraded from what you're talking about, sort of their once glory. What's the move? Do we kind of put it in reverse and try to rebuild those pre-war neighborhoods? Or do we have an opportunity now that we've kind of leveled everything to do something new a second time?
I think a perspective that I would take on that is maybe not try to have, such a prescriptive plan with it, I guess, right? Like so much of what we build today is you go from one city or one suburb to the next, to the next, to the next. So much of it is so similar from one place to the next because of how much regulation there is, right? Cities historically, right, through most of human history, they used to grow much more naturally, right? Like we didn't used to have these grand plan schemes of how a city was supposed to grow, right? And I think like a big step that we could do would be to remove a lot of that, what I would say is over-regulation, right? And that's the things like, parking minimums, lot sizes. There's a lot to do with zoning there, right? Like people think that zoning is also so important, and I'm not saying that you should have a factory right next to residential neighborhoods. That's not what I'm saying, right? Does it sound like such a bad thing to have like a little quiet corner store, in like a neighborhood?
Sure.
And to give people those kinds of opportunities. So much of that is illegal, right? Like we're in a housing crisis, and people wonder, oh, what's the solution? Well, the solution is to legalize housing. Housing is illegal,
Yeah, the city council actually just released a letter kind of detailing their budget proposal for next year. And of course, they kind of start by saying, well, we're in this budget crisis and we recognize that. They don't actually make a whole lot of appeals to any kind of austerity or anything that might be necessary in this short term. But one of the things that they talk about is addressing Denver's housing needs. And, they say, ensure the people of Denver are housed. And went through their list 4 bullet points here. They don't mention zoning. They don't mention regulation changings. They mention funding temporary rental and utility assistance and allocating funds for the residential property tax rebate program and maintaining funding for ADU construction and funding and implementing recommendations. And I'm like, all of this is additional funding. You're talking about putting more money, and none of these are bad programs, right? None of the people who designed them did anything with ill will, and they probably play a role even in our strong towns utopia.
Certainly.
But the very fact that they don't say we don't have enough housing, and one of our main tenets here is not going to be to eliminate the regulations that are making that the case, it's just kind of bewildering to witness.
And this is why we had such a difficult understanding of Proposition 2R, which was in the ballot last November. It was the same exact thing. A huge amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars dedicated to special programs for special groups. In the meantime, the city is playing a game of musical chairs. And the city was not interested in putting more chairs in the circle. So you can take a favorite group and say, here's a special program designed to be able to make you able to rent an apartment, to make you able to have a down payment on a house. But where's the extra apartment coming from? Where's the extra house coming from? Unless you're increasing the supply, at a certain level, it just doesn't matter. You just you're just rearranging the deck chairs.
Okay, so it sounds like from what you're saying here that really, from a Strong Towns perspective, at first pass, the number one thing we need to do is deregulate. I'm wondering, kind of on the offensive approach, what are some programs and policies that are going to bring around this Strong Towns utopia, this Strong Denver that we want, that aren't just ripping away the red tape? What can we actively fight for that will push us closer to that?
Yeah, I will say, kind of caveat that we do tend to focus on more of that, I don't want to say passive or defensive, like it does feel like an offensive approach to me to do that, deregulate. And Strong Downs fundamentally is we try to build, systems that can allow bottom up, solutions to come, right? If you build it, they'll come. If we deregulate, they'll build, because they probably will, right? Historically, that's what's happened. Our offensive approach is mostly to really campaign for these kinds of, initiatives. It seems really, really difficult to I very much understand and agree with a lot of like the affordable housing measures and such like that, right? But when we're looking at a housing crisis, it's like, how do you solve a supply side problem with incentivizing demand or subsidizing demand, right?
Sure.
Ed, as you said, where's that extra apartment going to come from, right? It seems obvious that the answer is that we should just allow people to build housing. It's very, very difficult and expensive to build housing for a lot of different reasons, and illegal. It's literally illegal.
Right.
People wonder, why don't they just build more housing? Well, it's because it's illegal.
Yeah,
you can't do that.
But having said that, there are tools we can do proactively, right? And one of our leaders, a guy named Robbie Stickney, and he's leading the charge in Strong Denver to do two things to make it easier for development to happen. Right now, as we know, we bemoan an entire block being leveled and a 501 being put up, this very anonymous. We all think it's great. We support this, but it's not a beautiful, vibrant, fun, walkable neighborhood.
Yeah.
What Robbie is leading the effort on is, what would it take to be able to have small developers, the owner of the house next door, just a guy who builds one or two houses at a time, to be able to go into a vacant lot and build something unique, beautiful, individual, and quick.
Yeah.
And the answer is number one, Denver, like so many cities, has over the decades just accumulated a vast number of regulations designing the permitting of construction. And it's slow and it's cumbersome and expensive, and therefore it favors the large corporate builders who've got the staffs to be able to do it. On top of that, we don't have any pre-approved plans. Imagine, wouldn't it be wonderful if there were a dozen different models of pre-approved houses, just like the old Sears pattern.
Yeah,
you
sure.
could do a mail order house.
Right.
And you could walk down to City Hall and you could say, I'm going to build pattern number 7.
Right.
And all right, here's your permit, go for it. And then you walk home and you start construction the next day. So these are the sorts of proactive things we're trying to put in place to make it possible for you. Vacant lot next door.
Right.
You want to put a house in there. How can we have you do it as quickly and as easily as possible? And then finally, something that National is doing that we haven't thought about systematically is National wants to work with cities to envision ways of using municipal finance to make it possible to jumpstart that. For example, you could imagine a down payment program where a city originates enough money for you to be able to get a down payment if you don't have the cash up front, or a co-appreciation loan where the city would share in your appreciation when you sell your house in exchange for giving you the funding necessary to build it.
Yeah.
So, and those are the things that, because like with a bank, the loan is held by the city's not going to necessarily lose anything at all. It's got the house backing it up. But it's just a question of getting the city to think creatively about bringing financing to bear developments that traditional banks, who typically favor larger, more corporate borrowers, aren't comfortable funding.
Yeah. It's an interesting point that you're kind of raising there. Obviously building any home is just going to be expensive. There's fixed costs that are always going to be expensive. But this is something I've been thinking about a little bit recently, is that all of our regulation and the burdens that we've put onto building homes means that the only people who can do it are going to be well-financed or are going to be professional developers. And you'll have the odd person building an ADU, but really building new homes is not going to be like a mom and pop developer kind of thing. You're going to have well-moneyed people coming in and building. And this is the thing that so many Denverites will complain about. They're like, well, it's the developers. They're taking advantage of our city. They're doing all this. And it's like, well, we didn't give anyone else an option other than the financed people to come in and do this, other than the mega corporations. So they're the only ones who can do it. You know, we have people come to neighborhood meetings and they propose to build a few new units in the neighborhood. And even these people they're structural engineers by trade. So the Sears catalog, you know, I was actually just thinking, this is an aside, but most of us would not be able to afford the Sears catalog homes of yore, which were cheap on purpose. But that type of thing, it just doesn't exist for most Denverites, even if they wanted to do it. You were talking a little bit about sort of the national approach and some of the ideas that are bopping around at a national level. I'm wondering, when we look nationally, what are some areas that are doing this right? Who's nailing their strong city, and what can we learn from them, and how can we integrate those lessons here in Denver?
This is perfect timing, because National has actually been spending a ton of energy in putting together a new tool which identifies what are the main things that a city needs to do to become a housing-friendly city, and what are the cities that are doing it. So go to the Strong National website. We're looking at it right now on my laptop, and there's an interactive map. I just clicked on Sacramento, California, and Sacramento, California has got, there's 6 categories. 5 of them have the green check mark about what needs to be done to have a housing-friendly city. So I'll just rattle it off really fast. Allow single-family home conversion to duplex or triplex by right.
Okay.
By right. Number 2, permit backyard cottages in all residential zones. Number 3, legalize starter homes in all residential areas. Number 4, repeal parking mandates for housing. Number 5, streamline the approval process. Sacramento's done all of that. The only thing they haven't done to get 6 out of 6 is eliminate minimum lot sizes.
Interestingly, hearing you talk about that, Denver's on the right pace with a lot of this.
Yes.
Seems like parking minimums are probably going away.
Yes.
Right?
Not probably.
I think in part thanks to advocacy
We
from
really
groups like
hope
you.
so.
Yeah. So say we all, right? Maybe that'll deserve
Shout out to Jill.
Yeah.
You guys are doing great work.
Yeah. It's not as streamlined as it can be, but the city has been trying to streamline the building process. There's a number of things in there. And the remaining things, duplex or triplex by right, are not that offensive, right? Even in areas of town where people are very against building practically anything, the ire is not usually placed on duplexes, triplexes, right? It's once things start to stack on top of each other that people get freaked out, which is...
And that makes sense, honestly, right? Like, ideally, we have incremental development. You know, like you say, how offensive is it to add a duplex or a triplex or even a fourplex to a neighborhood, right? Versus, you know, adding like an 18-story apartment building. I live in an 18-story apartment building. There are single-family homes across the street. Yeah. You know, right? Like...
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think I used to live in West Colfax. One of the things I loved about that is just the variety of housing choice. I lived in a 6-plex. Up the street, there was a little garden court with a few units on either side. There were duplexes, and there were, 8 units. And then you get closer to Sloan's, and they had kind of high-rise. There was a really just wonderful variety throughout that whole neighborhood. And in some ways, if you want, you can stay in that neighborhood as you progress through life. You start off in a studio, but maybe you meet somebody and you move into a little bit of a bigger space. And you have a kid and family, and you move into a slightly bigger space. Like, that kind of variety allows you to stay in the same neighborhood, which is great for all the things that you were talking about earlier. Knowing your neighbor, saying hi to them, and feeling like this is a place that I belong. So Denver does seem to be on the right track. What are like the next steps we need to take, right? The immediate actions before us that will make Denver just that much stronger.
It's funny you use the word the right track, because the elephant in the room, the thing we are on the absolute wrong track on. What happens after we get rid of parking minimums? What happens after we densify a neighborhood? What happens if you can't park wherever you want? Well, you hop on the bus, you hop on the train, but what about RTD? And, we spend a lot of time talking to our friends at Greater Denver Transit. I know that Danny Katz at Colorado Pierg is working a lot on this, but we have such a long way to go until we have a transit system that works for the average person who wants to walk down to the corner and a bus is going to be coming in the next 10 minutes and hop on that bus and be it on time and be it speedy and be it safe and be it clean.
There's a chicken and egg thing here,
Yes,
right?
there is.
We don't have the vibrant city yet,
Yes, there
and so
is.
we're sprawled out. There's not enough tax base to support the RTD bus line to come into your neighborhood. I think some people, I've heard this before, we can't get rid of parking minimums. RTD's no good.
Correct.
We can't change we can't add a bike lane. Nobody bikes here yet, right? And it's like, well, nobody rides RTD because there's not enough people living in the neighborhood to support more than an hourly service. And so how do you approach that?
Look, first of all, I just want to say you are absolutely right. And this is the biggest problem that we face because go back to the original sin. A choice was made in this country to embed extreme car dependency across the entire built landscape. And we have been heading down that road for 80 years. And there's a reason why it's so hard to do this and so expensive to do this and so socially disruptive to do this. And there's a reason why you go down to the suburbs and you even start talking about this and they freak out because car dependency is like the air we breathe. It's like a fish in water. Even to imagine life without that is profoundly psychologically disturbing for the vast majority of Americans, right?
Yeah.
So, but you're also right insofar as getting from here to there is going to be enormously costly and enormously disruptive. And the only answer that I can give you, because there's no secret solution, there's no magic potion for this. We have to recognize, number one, that it's the right thing to do. Number two, that the suburban experiment that we've been running for almost a century is ironically out of gas. We've got to stop expanding our highway and freeway network. We can't afford it anymore. And so we just have to start working, as Montana said, as locally as possible, as fine-grained as possible, to start making the changes that will allow this to happen, recognizing that it's going to take time. And recognizing we have
doing the smallest thing you can.
Right.
You mentioned before we started, actually, an interesting tidbit from CDOT's annual budget. And it was about kind of how we are funding various things. Would you mind? I think that just puts an interesting point on the way that our streets are bleeding us dry.
Sure. So CDOT, they release a big PDF every year. This year, I think it was 86 or so pages, where they describe in great detail, but for public consumption, it's not a ton of spreadsheets, where the money's come from and where the money's going. It's still the case that the vast majority of money that CDOT spends is spending on highways and on roads and highways and freeways. They spend some on bus tang. They spend a little bit on traffic mitigation projects, but a lot of it's road building. Right now, from state sources, according to the last budget document I took a look at, direct fees generated by driving, mostly gas tax, but also every year you get your sticker in the mail and you got to send in your money to get your sticker, and there's all those random fees, the bridge fee and so forth.
Yeah.
So if you total all that money up, the state generates a little bit more than a third. When I did the math, it was 36% of the money that's going to CDOT comes from the state-generated user fees and gas taxes. Another chunk of it comes from the feds, and a chunk of that is federal gas tax. But if you look at their almost 300-page federal Department of Transportation document, it's impossible to say what percentage of their revenue is coming from gas tax and what percentage is coming from general funds, but it's less than half.
Yeah.
So most of the money we're spending on extreme car dependency is not coming from the users. It's coming from us, the taxpayers, whether we drive or not.
Right. And as somebody who does not own a car, that is all the more stinging for me. It's like I'm paying for all you people to drive on your dang roads.
But no bike lane for you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I do own a car, but I don't drive hardly ever.
Right.
It's not uncommon for me to only drive a day or two a month.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I get around on my bike pretty much everywhere. And you asked, what are some smaller things we can do? Bike infrastructure is comparatively very cheap, to building roads and trains and a lot of these other things. And I mean, it can be as simple as putting a planter out on an intersection. They did that during COVID here in Denver, right? And it made, streets a little bit slower. When streets are a little bit slower, they're more inviting to people on bikes. That's as simple as just putting a planter right in the middle of the stop sign intersection, Cars are driving slower. The streets are more inviting for people on bikes. That's cheap,
And this is something I will say about the city council letters, that they did have a section on mobility. They had a section on climate where they called out sort of green corridors and greenways. They had a mobility section where they talk about vulnerable road users. And a lot of it was focused on safety, which is great because I think often when you do safety intervention, you just improve mobility for everybody. But it does seem to be a place that at least they have a little bit more clarity in the way that they're thinking about this.
And this is great. We think that they're doing is great. We support plastic, sticks, and paint. Seriously, I'm not being flip. However, one of our members and myself, we went out last summer with the team at Dottie that's in charge of doing that. They've got a remedial program to take care of the most dangerous intersections, traffic calming measures, changing out the signals, putting in better crosswalks, making the lanes narrow. And we're 100% in favor of this. We think it's fantastic, and we wanted to see what they were doing. And the team there is equally committed, but they've got the same problem that you opened up this podcast episode with. They have no money. And if you say, hey, what's the list of the X most dangerous intersections in the city, and how long is it going to take you to fix these? It's crazy.
Right.
I mean, for example, our first crash, we do crash analysis. We've done a few crash analyses of really dangerous intersections. First one we did was out of Quebec, where the Poissy freeway narrows down into 3 lanes, and there's a really dangerous crosswalk there. And the proposal we put in place, brilliant proposal, narrow the lanes, traffic calming, all that. The city thinks that that's a horrible intersection. They'd love to fix it too. It's just a question, how are they going to get the money? The infrastructure we have is in place. It was built for high-speed car travel without any thought to any form of safety mitigation for other modalities, and now we've got to fix it, and we can't afford it.
Right. And much of it was built kind of to the antithetical of what all the city officials are talking about these days, which is, how do we get people to come downtown? How do we get people to spend money in the city? Pay taxes in the city, right? Our roads were designed to go one way, to go fast, to get out of the city. And, I think that this is a good lesson for all of us who are mobility advocates, as well as, housing advocates and everything, is that when we're talking to city officials, money talks, right? And if we can say, hey, look, one of the things here that connects to the budget crisis is how much we're spending on roads that we probably actually shouldn't be spending if we had just designed it in this different way. Like, we're actually going to save a lot of money long term. It might be resonant. Who knows? That's not going to help us in the short term, probably, but it might answer that second question of, well, how do we make sure this never happens again? I'm wondering, what specific pieces of legislation are you eyeing right now? I know the General Assembly is all wrapped up, but next year, are there bills that you are hoping to help bring forward or help promote at a state level? If there's anything coming up at the city council, I'd love to hear it too, but usually the state level is a little bit more public. So.
Yeah, the most immediate one on my mind right now is actually local to City Council, and that is going to be for the parking minimums, which we've talked about. Denver City Council is scheduled to hear public comment on parking minimums on July 14th. Okay. So that's something that's very, very much on my mind right now. We have, as an organization, been pushing that for a while, and it would be amazing to be able to get that checkbox to try to get us that much closer to a housing ready city. That's the most immediate one that is on my mind right now, personally.
I've got an opposite crazy, ridiculous
You
goal.
Want more parking.
Yeah, I want more parking. This is a fantasy at this point, but what would it take to put a coalition of people together and plant a stick in the ground now that the General Assembly session is over? The off-session committees are going to start up. There's going to be thinking about what the next session is going to look like. What if we were to sit down and say, hey, we've got a statewide budget crisis too. Let's just end all highway expansion. Let's just take that CDOT. We've all complaining that everything needs to be repaired, everything needs to be maintained. Let's take all the CDOT money dedicated to roads and highways and freeways and maintain the system we have, and let's stop building anything new.
Yeah.
Ideally, we could take that money within the CDOT budget and take their rail line item. And right now, as you know from the proposals for Mountain Rail, we've got dedicated funding coming from these 2 bills that were passed in the last session, the rental car money and the oil and gas fee. But there's no general fund money at all. If you look at the budget for CDOT budget, the rail number is 0. So wouldn't it be nice if we could take that highway expansion money and redirect it to RTD, redirect it to rural transit, more Mustang service, redirect it to other cities outside the Front Range that are severely limited on transit, and think creatively about that instead of continuing to feed the highway industrial complex year after year after year, building more and more sprawl.
Even probably the most car-brained Democrat in the state house would agree with you that public transit is a more efficient use of dollars, of space, of people's,
Did you mean carbon Republican when you said
well, maybe. Who knows? They might. Yeah, right. Well, they don't get a whole lot of say these days.
Well, remember, the wheel of fortune's always turning.
It's true.
We have to appeal across the aisle.
I mean, take it to everybody. And actually, I wrote a piece on the Denver Urbanism blog. Quick plug for that, called "When is a Bus Worth It?" And it just kind of looked at emissions. It looked at just physical space on the road. It looked at average price that somebody's paying for their car over the lifetime of that vehicle versus the amount that we're paying kind of for buses broken down, and said, when per capita does it become worth it? Like, how many people do we need to ride? And it's just like in every case, it's not 100 people. It's, in some cases it's like 6 people are riding or 20 people are riding. And like, you would think that somebody at the state level would say, well, that's just a more efficient use of dollars. What's happening? Is it just that they drive their car into the Capitol every day and so they don't get it?
The car is the symbol of freedom, perhaps, right? It's culturally ingrained in people. There's so many factors. There's obviously, automotive, lobbying and such that's very much pushing these things in certain directions. A lot of it's, culture. There's so many different things, right? But it's really not that hard to really, kind of think about it and understand that cars that are incredibly, incredibly inefficient. If you're going to go to the grocery store, right, and, you take your 150-pound self to go to the grocery store to buy, 20 pounds worth of groceries, but you also drove your 5,000-pound car, right, to get there, right, like to go there and back, that's incredibly inefficient, extremely inefficient. And I mean, cars are just getting bigger and bigger and heavier, too, you know?
Terrible use of space, our public infrastructure. It's just all that more wear and tear.
It is,
and I believe it scales exponentially. It's not just a simple linear, you add 100 pounds on top of 100 pounds. It's not twice as much. It's 4 times as much.
Yeah.
Okay, well, this has all been really amazing. I really appreciate y'all kind of taking me through StrongDenver and what it means. I'm interested if each of you could communicate one thing to city leadership in this moment, what would it be?
Legalize housing.
I love it. It's great.
Make it legal and easy to build housing. You want to solve the housing crisis. It's easy to do that. Legalize housing.
Okay, you took the easy one, Ed. Now it's a little bit harder.
I'm going to be more poetic and more romantic, and I'm going to ask anybody in leadership: have you ever been to Mexico City? Have you ever been to Paris? Have you ever been to Tokyo? Have you ever been to any urban space outside of North America where you have tasted and felt and smelt and lived what an urban environment free of extreme car dependency is like? Do you remember how happy you were there? Do you remember how relaxed you were there? Do you remember how you said to yourself, why can't we have that here? And then you come back here and you're weighed down with the day-to-day responsibility, and that's just a happy memory that you think about now and again at a free moment. But I would call upon you to try to recall that feeling you had and say, we can have that here. It'll be a whole lot of work and it will be a pain in the neck and people won't like it, but we can have that here and there's no reason why we can't fight for it, and that's what we should do.
That's awesome. Yeah. I always start off this podcast by saying that this is a podcast on all things city building. And it really is, to tie your 2 points together, it's what are we trying to build here? What are we trying to do here? It's exactly that. And the second half of it is, well, you have to legalize the building in order to have city building.
Right. People have all these wild ideas, but those aren't legal actually.
Right. Yeah. Well, okay. I want to make sure that people are able to plug in with y'all. So how can people get involved with StrongDenver? And once they do get involved, what should they expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a website. It is strongdenver.city.
We made it ourselves, so it's not super slick and professional.
I think it looks good.
You can Google us as well. We're also on Facebook and X, and we make Reddit posts. We have an email list as well. If you go to our website, strongdenver.city, there's contact information on the website as well and how you can get involved. We have a Discord, which a lot of people are on, and that's where most of our active communication happens. And then we meet every single Monday for either workshops, which is what we do most of the time, where people come together. We bring our laptops and we actually try to work on these issues, brainstorming, doing outreach, all these other different things. And then once a month we have more of a social type meeting. We meet at Hooked on Colfax. the second Monday of every month at 6:30 p.m. If you go to Hookdown Colfax, second Monday of every month at 6:30 p.m. and you ask for Strong Denver, we're going to be in the basement there, meeting with a good group of folks.
Great. Well, maybe I'll see you there. Ed, Montana, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us. It was great.
Yeah, fantastic. Wonderful.
Single stair. Well, I can't build a single stair building.
Exactly,
It's not allowed.
Oh, that's looking good.